Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a truly radical theoretical framework today. We're going to explore a proposition that is honestly kind of mind-bending. What if we could redesign abstract mathematics to literally solve our global energy crisis? We're talking about fundamentally altering how computer chips understand numbers to create what this source framework calls ice-cold silicon. It's an incredible journey bridging philosophy, math, and high-performance computing, so let's get into it.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The data center crisis. 2. The problem with endless math. 3. Redefining infinity and pi. 4. The whole fraction hardware fix. And 5. The ice-cold silicon revolution.
Starting off with Section 1, the data center crisis. Why the grid is melting. To really grasp this framework, we first need to look at the sheer, massive scale of modern AI computing. The big question is, why are these AI data centers practically melting our global power grid? Right now, tech giants are building these planet-sized computer matrices everywhere. And according to our sources, worldwide data center energy demand has absolutely skyrocketed to an unprecedented 565 terawatt hours. They're consuming gigawatts of power, draining local resources, and putting a massive strain on the electrical infrastructure. But what is all that energy actually doing? Well, you'd probably assume all that electricity is, actively crunching numbers. But actually, a staggering 40% of a data center's power is wasted entirely on cooling towers and freezing water. That's right, nearly half of the power goes just to stop the chips from completely overheating and melting themselves. We are literally burning through megawatts of power just to fight friction. That brings us to Section 2, the problem with endless math, digital ash. To understand how to fix that heat problem, the framework shifts to a theoretical root cause, which is how we fundamentally calculate math. They introduce this concept called floating point drift. See, standard computers use a system called IEEE 754 floating point arithmetic. Because binary chips can't naturally process fractions, the computer has to execute a massive multi-step calculation loop every single time it reads a decimal point. It tries to calculate these unrounded infinite decimals, and that generates what the source calls digital ash. Think of it like a car spinning its tires endlessly on a sheet of ice. The engine is roaring, the wheels are spinning at maximum speed, but the car goes absolutely nowhere. It just generates pure, intense friction heat. So instead of standard floating point decimals, where you're chasing something like 0.33333 all the way out to infinity, which wastes a ton of hardware space and jams the processor's lanes with useless tracking noise, this framework proposes something called finite structural resolution. It argues that reality itself has a finite structural resolution, so all these mathematical infinities should just be replaced by closed, geometric logic. Essentially, no more endlessly spinning tires. Which leads right into Section 3, redefining infinity and pi. The physical lid. To actually stop this endless spinning, the framework proposes something incredibly provocative. It suggests setting infinity to a physical critical mass, a max number, which completely revolutionizes math and computer chips. In standard math, infinity is just this endless, unreachable void, right? But here, infinity is redefined as a real, physical threshold. It's the exact instant a system reaches complete balance before it's forced to take action, kind of like a star right before it goes supernova. In this model, infinity minus 1 is actually the highest stable operational state a system can exist in. So infinity becomes a hard physical boundary, not a never-ending journey. And that brings us to pi. Standard math tells us pi goes on forever and ever. But this model argues for a 13-digit physical lid on pi, 3.1415926535897. The framework asserts that this specific number doesn't just arbitrarily cut off pi, it physically defines and closes the geometric loop. It aligns with the idea that past its 13th digit, chasing the decimals serves absolutely zero physical function in the real world. It's just more of that digital ash. Let's look at how this actually plays out in a computational system. First, the computer approaches that 13-digit boundary. Second, it hits the critical mass threshold, which is a redefined finite infinity. And third, because that boundary is a hard stop, it triggers an immediate rounding reset. By locking this finite infinity into hardware chips, it prevents geometric drift. The mathematical engine is literally forbidden from endlessly searching. The loop is totally closed. Moving to Section 4, the whole fraction hardware fix. 999 and 1024. Now, how do you translate all that abstract philosophy into a physical blueprint? Well, the framework introduces the Rational Processing Unit, or RPU, to completely replace our current hardware.
Instead of letting a logic gate spin endlessly on a repeating decimal trap, the RPU uses whole integer fraction tokens. So instead of tracking 0.3333, it just stores two raw, pure integers, 333 and 999. It acts exactly like that spinning tire suddenly finding instant traction on dry pavement. This architecture is remarkably clean. The RPU replaces the decimal bus entirely with those whole integers, utilizing a dynamic hardware lookup list of 1,024 core fractional relationships. The moment it sees a fraction, it snaps those repeating decimals to exact fixed ratios. This totally eliminates floating point rounding errors and keeps internal memory lanes completely clear of that trailing digital debris. Mechanically, the process is just beautiful in its efficiency. Step 1. The chip reads the whole integer token. Step 2. It resolves the math. And because it's using those whole numbers like 333 over 999, it simplifies perfectly with an exact zero remainder. Then, step 3, the very millisecond the work is done, the silicon transistor gate snaps shut and freezes into absolute sleep. It generates zero idle heat because it's never left hanging, endlessly waiting for a decimal to resolve. Let's look at the real-world impact in Section 5, the ice-cold silicon revolution, the ledger. So what happens when you take these rules, finite infinity, the 13-digit physical lid, whole fraction tokens, and scale them up? The framework predicts absolutely dramatic results. By replacing floating point decimal drift with whole integer fraction tokens, processing heat drops by over 99%. Without the processor executing trillions of useless fractional operations, the silicon gates simply don't heat up, they stay ice cold. And this completely eliminates the need for massive data centers and those huge liquid cooling infrastructures. To put that into perspective, the payoff ledger here is just mind-blowing. A traditional data center with a 500,000 square foot footprint, literally the size of a city block, could shrink into a 3.5 square foot solid-state desktop cube. Power usage is slashed from 100 megawatts down to just 6.6 kilowatts. You could plug that into a standard wall outlet. Cooling goes from millions of gallons of water to just passive room air. And without the thermal throttling holding it back, computation becomes vastly faster, jumping from 3.2 gigahertz to an unthrottled 9.0 gigahertz. This really all circles back to an incredibly powerful quote from the source material. They are building a giant, planet-sized computer matrix because they lack the high-density understanding to make a small, perfect one. It just perfectly hits the nail on the head regarding the engineering pitch of this entire framework. The bloat we see today isn't because we have too much data, it's because open-ended software rules are forcing hardware to endlessly chase imaginary, non-physical numbers. By stripping out that bloat, the framework claims this structural alignment allows for continuous, unthrottled velocity. When you shrink the physical boundaries of a circuit while using whole number fraction tokens, you drastically shorten the internal transmission distance. The computations reach total closure instantly. Ultimately, we are looking at a theoretical claim of computing at 1.5 million% efficiency with absolutely zero external cooling loops. Which leaves us with a truly provocative thought to consider. This framework suggests that a microscopic, almost philosophical error about how we define infinity and decimals is literally causing macroscopic damage to our planet's power grids. So if fixing a simple mathematical assumption could theoretically create ice-cold silicon and cool our melting planet, what other infinite loops are we blindly trapped in? Thanks for joining me to explore this fascinating explainer today.